Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good any time of the day or night, wherever you are. Peace and blessings. And thank you for joining me again for this next segment of this discussion and for a little bit of your time. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. Last uh, video, I said that we would go on to uh, the paragraph that was warning possible interloping negatives. And as usual, I'm going to go ahead and read it, then we'll come back and discuss. Okay, so it reads, earlier we talked about the non-economic good of the horses and the N-word in their wild or natural state. We talked about the principle of breaking and tying them together for orderly production. Furthermore, we talked about paying particular attention to the female savage and her offspring for orderly future planning. Then, more recently, we stated that by reversing the positions of the male and female savages, we had created an orbiting cycle that turns on its own axis forever until this phenomenon occurred and reshifted the positions of the male and female savages. Our experts warned us about the possibility of this phenomenon occurring, for they say the mind has a strong drive to correct and recorrect itself over time if it can touch a substantial, original, historical base. They advised us that the best way to deal with the phenomenon is to shut off the brute's mental history and create a multiplicity of phenomena, of illusions, that each illusion can twirl into its own orbit, something similar to floating balls in a vacuum. This creation of multiplicity of phenomena, illusions, entails the principles of crossbreeding the N-word and the horse, as we stated above. The purpose of which is to create a diversified division of labor, thereby creating different levels of labor and different values of illusions at each connecting level of labor. The result of which is the severance of the points of original beginnings for each sphere illusion. Since we feel that the subject matter may get more complicated as we proceed in laying down our economic plan concerning the purpose, reason, and effect of crossbreeding horses and N-words, we shall lay down the following definitional terms for future generations. 1. Orbiting cycle means a thing turning in a given path. 2. Axis means upon which or around which the body turns. 3. Phenomenon means something beyond ordinary conception and inspires awe and wonder. 4. Multiplicity means a great number. 5. Sphere means a globe. 6. Crossbreeding N-words means taking as many drops of good white blood and putting them into as many N-word women as possible, varying the drops by various tones that you want, and letting them breed with each other until circle of colors appears as you desire. What this means is this: put the N-words and the horse in the breeding pot, mix some donkeys and some good white blood, and what do you get? You got a multiplicity of colors, backward, unusual N-words, running tide to backward mules, long-headed mules, the production of itself, the other sterile. The one constant, the other dying. We keep the N-word constant, for we may replace the mule for another tool. Both mule and N-word tied to each other, neither knowing where the other came from, and neither productive for itself nor without each other. Now, that's a whole lot of words. They went through a whole lot there to put out this kind of explanation, I guess, of what they were doing. But I want to go ahead with this, and I want to talk about a couple of things. First of all, they said experts. Experts. They talked to their experts, okay? And this lets us know that this was not just something that a slave owner woke up one morning and said, "Oh, I think this is what we're going to do." No, this was years and years and years of experimentation, with a horse and a mule and an African male and female. And, just like they would put something in a lab and say, well, let's see what happens if we do this. What result do we get if we do that? These people did this for years before even they ever really knew what to do in terms of the Africans. The Africans were not going to be enslaved just because. I don't think there was one African that lived that didn't think at some point in time, on some level, what is my homeland like? Where did I come from? Who are my people? Why am I here? Those kinds of questions. So anyway, they said that there was possible interloping negatives, and they were afraid of this reshifting of the male and female positions, because we have to understand, in Africa, and this was across, I took a sample, or read an article from pertaining specifically to the Nigerian family makeup, but that I looked and found out that that was the case almost across the entire continent of Africa. And a few of them had a maternal setup rather than a paternal setup, but they all were setting up the family so that they could be productive, management, not geared toward necessarily money, but productivity, making sure that everybody had what they had, taking the skills of people and using them in the best way for it to be best for the family. In the African culture, yes, you had these individual families and individual households, but they viewed all Africans as part of the family. Even if there were some Africans that came over from another tribe, they were pretty much united and had a sense of solidarity on the continent. And when the Opaques went over there and decided, the first time that they were going to go over here and get these people, they had to come back and do some studying and some planning and some investigating, because they knew that they weren't just going to go over there and take over. They knew that. Yeah. Because they had even sent missionaries over there. And it got to a point where they weren't listening to the missionaries anymore. So, yeah, they knew that they had to do some really good investigating and planning. And they put scientists and psychologists and all kinds of people together so that they would have something beside their own strength, physical strength, and ability to go over there and overthrow these Africans, and they didn't really overthrow that many. They colonized a lot of areas. They did. But that taking away African males and females and enslaving them and bringing them back over to the United States, that was a feat that they knew that they had to prepare for. Not only getting them here, but what were they going to do with them once they got them here? Because they knew that that was not going to work. Just getting them there, that wasn't going to do it. They had Africans who jumped ship, choosing rather to die in the ocean than to be enslaved. So they had some fight on their hands, and they knew that. So the male and female roles reshifting back to the natural state, the original cultural state, that's what they were afraid of. And the ordained, natural, successful, progressive order of the African family is what they were up against. And that's what they had to get out of them in order for them to be successful in their enslavement of African people here in America. Now, you know, they went through and they talked about, you know, the mind having a strong drive to correct and recorrect itself. Okay, they were only going to be able to do this, and if you notice, they say continually. You had to, there had to never be a time that you weren't doing this, because given just that one lapse in time in doing this, the mind having that ability to correct and recorrect itself given the time. And listen, what they said is that, you know, it would reconnect. And it said it can touch a substantial, original, historical base. They knew. This is why Africans were brought from the African continent to America. They didn't want them to be able to make a connection back to the continent or anything else. And later on, we'll talk about some other things that they did to make it, to make us not be able to look back and see where we came from. They didn't want us to do that. They didn't want us to make a connection. And so, because remember, the OPEGs never intended for slavery to end. They never intended that. This speaks to how the OPEGs were so eager to remove our story from American schools right now, today. They're doing it today. They're still here. You know, they're not carrying around whips and riding around on horses and, you know, beating people and torturing people. They're still here. Their descendants are here, okay? And their descendants are the ones that are taking our story from American schools, libraries, and museums. And they're trying to ban and prohibit teaching our historical truth so that we have no connection to our roots, our past. See, that's why they do this. Because the truth is, you know, one thing about the truth is it finds a way to surface. And so what they're trying to do is eliminate as many avenues that the truth can come out through. And they were the ones that said, if you want to keep something from an African, put it in a book. And the only reason that worked for the time that it worked is that we didn't speak the same language. So we have to understand what they were doing. This section is going to take, as you probably have guessed by now, some time to get through. And I have just touched the surface of it. So I will come back next time and go through some of these other things to make sure we get a good grasp of what was going on and what is still going on today, all right? Okay, until next time, thank you for joining me Again, peace and blessings, and stay woke. Y'all go get your popcorn and your drink that you're gonna drink. Not alcohol. Y'all don't get alcohol because I want you to pay attention. But go get go get your your juice or your soda, whatever it is that you're gonna drink, so you can watch this unfold in front of your eyes. All right. Until next time. Love y'all.